Things have been comparatively quiet along the border between Ukraine and Russia for the past few weeks, and there's some evidence, if you believe Vladimir Putin, that things will stay that way, at least in the near future. Putin is continuing to say, as he has for about a week and a half, 2 weeks now, that he is moving his troops away from the border with Ukraine, and they are going about their business doing drills and things like that. Now, the U.S., of course, is not just trusting Vladimir Putin. I think it's a wise decision on their part. They're saying that they're currently waiting for clear, firm evidence of this move before we make any judgment. Now, I would have to imagine that with the number of both drones, but also other sorts of surveillance satellites and aircraft that we have, not to mention people on the ground, that we would have a pretty good idea of whether Putin was being authentic or not. Are they still within 10 miles of the Ukrainian border, or have they actually moved back to their standard holding pattern that he's alleging?
This is not the Korean War. Like, we can look and see.
Yeah.
And so I
can see their tanks from here.
I like that we've at least gotten to the point where Vladimir Putin refers to them as his troops.
Yeah, his personal troops.
Right, it's no longer generic guys in some uniform fighting for democracy. I don't know who they are. Yeah, they seem to come from the area of Russia, but who knows?
Well, he's still trying to maintain the fiction that he's got, the tens of thousands of troops that are within striking distance, literally, of the Ukrainian border. But you also have the pro-Russian Ukrainians, supposedly, who are operating in East and South Ukraine right now. And because of that distinction, this is like a win-win for Vladimir Putin. He can move his troops away, whether he is or not, and he still has those people operating on his behalf, whether they're wearing Ukrainian uniforms or not, sowing chaos, sowing dissent in various cities in Ukraine, and accomplishing his goals, making the government look like it's unable to control its territory, which at this point it currently is, making it seem increasingly unlikely that the upcoming election is going to generate any sort of political or military stability in the country. And all the while, he gets to wait, 30 miles, 40 miles away from the border, able to take advantage of any situation as it comes up.
And when you say sowing dissent, some of the dissent there is, of course...
Some is authentic, I'm sure.
It's legitimate. I mean, it's a majority in some of these parts of the Ukraine-Russian population, and wanting to side with Russia in a country that was divided, essentially. It was first made part of the Soviet Union without anybody asking anybody there, and then taken away without anybody asking anybody who was there. So, in that sense, like some of the people who've criticized us and Jank for being, I can't even remember, for being pro-Russian, or are we anti-Russian?
Anti-Russian. We're biased against Vladimir Putin,
right.
who seems like a sort of man who doesn't need our support.
Yeah, I'm totally biased against Vladimir Putin. I am, because he's a thug, right? So it's very easy.
Yeah.
But that said, I get it. I don't know that there's greatness lurking on the other side in this. I don't.
Exactly.
I don't. And I know, and I get that this country has been divided back and forth rather arbitrarily. So now we're in the middle of it. That said, merely saying you're pulling back your troops is not the same as pulling back your troops, but it's also a small lessening of tension.
Yeah,
which
we're not in Estonia right now. So some of the fears that we had justifiably a month or 6 weeks ago, those have not come to pass, at least not on the timeline we worried about at that time.
A group, it's a British-based group called the Syrian Observatory for Human Rights. They have released figures on the death toll in the civil war in Syria. And as you might imagine, the numbers are staggering, the numbers are depressing. They exceed 160,000 people. Right now, the number of dead in Syria stands, according to this group, at 162,402 deaths. Meanwhile, 6.5 million people have been displaced from their homes, and more than 2.5 million, 2.7 million, have had to flee the country. Then the numbers inside the numbers of dead, that 162,402 figure, also staggering. They break down this way. They include nearly 53,978 civilian deaths. The others, fighters between rebel fighters, 27,000, 38,000 Syrian soldiers. And then of that 54,978 civilian deaths, you see the numbers there. 8,607 children, 5,586 women. Presumably, non-fighters. So it's just the numbers they're just terrible. They're just horrible numbers.
The world was justifiably shocked at I think the initial number that came out with the chemical weapons attacks was about 12,000 had died. Now we're finding out far, far, far worse than we thought it was when our country was considering whether or not we should intervene militarily. It's gotten far worse, at least 60,000 more dead since the last numbers we had in the middle of last year. Yeah, absolutely crazy numbers. And so one thing I want to talk about here is we often will hear numbers like that, and it's hard for us to put it in historical perspective and to put it in perspective in the American context. But those 54,000 just civilians who have died, I mean, that's competitive with the number dead in Vietnam, with far higher than in many of the wars America has engaged in.
Far dead, the number of dead American soldiers in Vietnam.
Exactly. Obviously, just the number for the civilians here, far more soldiers dead. And when we think back on the experience with Vietnam, we think of it as being like a wood chipper for human lives, effectively, just being thrown away so casually, so carelessly, and it's far worse right now in Syria. It's worse today, and it will be in the coming weeks and months.
So, and more evidence to just completely undermine the credibility of Bashar Assad is that right now, what Syria and the Assad government is sort of hanging their hat on is a June 3rd election, an election that, guess what, Assad will win. And
good chance.
But forget that we know that it's a rigged election, and the United States is not going to consider the results of the election authentic, and most of the and certainly the Western world isn't going to consider it that way. No human rights group is. But also the idea that you could hold an election right now in the middle of a civil war and then try and make an argument that it's going to be a genuine election. I mean, it's just crazy. But I used it for Putin. This guy worse right now. Yeah. Hey, look. Somebody worse than Putin.
Exactly. I mean, we have to bear in mind that, of course, we held elections during our civil war, which had a far higher death toll. And especially when you factor in the lesser military technology, it's pretty amazing how many people we were able to kill, mostly through disease and famine and things like that in our own civil war. But, of course, very different political makeup there. Yeah, I don't think anyone is going to buy this except for perhaps his immediate family. We
acknowledged who wasn't participating in that election. Exactly. Right. We were like, yeah, we're going to have an election.
We were pretty clear.
And the South, you guys aren't doing it.
Yeah. And one final point I do want to make about this, though, and this is not me saying we should have done something differently than we did, America, when it comes to the Syrian civil war. But we knew when we were considering going in or not, going in has consequences, some of which we can sort of predict, some that we cannot. Not going in also has consequences, and sometimes this is what it looks like when foreign powers don't intercede and don't try to impose some sort of stability on a country. Sometimes tens or hundreds of thousands of civilians and soldiers go on to die.